Welcome back to the Horror Academic. And I know I said I was pretty much done with my research, but uh, today is actually the last day I'm working on the project. So last night, in order to stay in the zone, as it were, I looked for some more black horror to watch. And well, I kind of exhausted what was out there that I could easily get my hands on, given the current state, um, as far as the blaxploitation era. So I moved a little bit into the 90s and 2000s to look some films that I had missed in that time period. And last night I ended up finding on Tubi the movie Bones, starring Snoop Dogg, but more importantly, starring Pam Grier. So I was like, all right, I read a little bit about that. Let's take a look. Gotta say, first impressions, not a bad little movie. Obviously, it's a new line, so they were given probably a mediocre budget. Considering we're talking, I think this is '01. Some pretty good CG mixed with live action. It kind of melded well. Some of the effects were served their purpose well. For something, I mean, it's hard to watch a film now from the early 2000s and not notice the CG. But I thought they did a pretty good job, and it didn't take away from me enjoying the film. So that's always a plus. Um, I thought it was a good story. It essentially starts as a haunted house film and evolves into kind of like a ghost revenge story. It takes place sort of in two time periods. Let's say towards the end of the 70s, where the Snoop Dogg character is Johnny Bones is a, a good-hearted gangster. Like, he's respected in town. He doesn't deal drugs. He seems to be more of the running numbers. Maybe there's some hints that he might be a bit of a pimp, and not in a, pimping kind of way. Just, it's what he does. And everybody seems to really respect him. And, what happens is essentially these guys come in who want to start dealing hard drugs. And he is kind of their barrier, saying, that's not worth it in my community. Go do that someplace else. But I don't want to deal with it here. I don't want to see my people have to go through that. And because of it, he ends up getting murdered. So the house that he lived in becomes a haunted house because of the way he dies. And you go to the future, and now in present day, we have three siblings from a mixed racial family. And they are going to buy out this home that is somehow related to their family, and you don't understand until much later why rather. And they're going to make it up to be like the premier nightclub spot. And of course, they kind of disturb the bones of Johnny Bones and kind of wake up the monster, who then starts to seek revenge. It deals with a lot of perhaps class issues within race, where it is in some ways subtly the secondary story is the guy who got out of the kind of the ghetto and kind of made better for himself, and his kids now going back to kind of reclaim space and make it better for the community, and him not seeing eye to eye with them, and then you realize why and how he was involved in the past. But Pam Grier's character is good. She's like the one character that kind of is the go through, the flow through of the story, because she stayed, and she not only was his girlfriend before he died, but she became kind of like the overseer of the space where he died. Sorry. And she has these kind of magical powers. She is a seer. She runs essentially like a tarot reading den where she also does seances. If you go by the kind of terminology within Black movement of film, she's kind of in some ways deemed a mystical woman, or in other ways the term magical Negro comes in, where she's not quite to that extent. She is a fairly positive character of resilience. She also is she's the reason why we can understand what's happening now. I think she's a very good empowered female character because she definitely has agency in wanting to protect her community. Um, there's some, from what I've read, some kind of about her character not being strong enough. Um, Also, you have to remember this movie is a vehicle for Snoop Dogg. I'm not sure if this was his first. I think this might be his first horror film. I know he did a few, but it's right around in there. So, like I said, it's 2001. So she's kind of, I want to say about 5 or 6 years off of Jackie Brown. So this is very much in the resurgence of her career, but still in this zone of people who admired her when they were young, employing her in their films. And it's very obvious that Snoop Dogg picked her in any way that he could with the production company, of course, to be his love interest and the kind of the savior character because of how much he adored her and loved her growing up. But this is a good way to segue into the conversation of the only thing that was a little hard to follow was the fact that they were dealing with the same actors playing characters in two separate decades. So some people look too old for their character in one decade and too young for their character in another decade. It's like the ages don't line up, and it's a little creepy at times. Like I'm sure Snoop Dogg at the time thought I guess he was in his 30s and thought he was, an older dude. But looking at it now, he looks so baby-faced and young compared to what we know Snoop Dogg as today that it's almost creepy of how young he is when Pam Grier is supposed to be his girlfriend. And you're kind of like, that's uncomfortable for me. That's like it feels like a 30-year gap. It's a little awkward. And then even more so when he comes back later, he is the same age. His ghost, of course, does not age. So now all these people are aged around him and he's just kind of still baby-faced and young. So that's a little weird. Some of the makeup that's done to change characters is a little offsetting. The guy who's the white cop who's involved in this kind of conspiracy, he's so overly make-upped to look older in the modern sequence that he looked like 300 other actors to me in my head. I'm looking it up like, I don't know this guy, but he looks like 500 other people. Kind of like when they would overdo De Niro's makeup to age him sometimes, and he looks like other people, and it's a little awkward. So those kind of things are a little offsetting, but those are, I probably would have cast different people for the different decades that just looked similar. That's just me. Obviously, this film was very influenced by the Hellraiser series of movies. I think at this point, New Line actually even owned Hellraiser, so that's a little cannibalistic of them, because there's definite moments that remind you of transformation sequence, especially of Frank in the first film. As blood is poured in the home, it is rebuilding the bones of Johnny Bones. So he literally ligaments and tendons and skin come back onto his flesh, exactly like Frank in the Hellraiser film. I mean, it's cool they pulled it off. It didn't take away from it again. It was a little homage, but a little more ripoff at times. There's some interesting things done about it. It's very much the idea of there's a thin veil between the living and the dead, and this home has become haunted in a way that is cutting that veil in half and giving it openings. And you see these figures that are trying to break out that are dead. And that's very well done. Very, very nicely done. And they become kind of like, well, I don't want to tell you too much, but they become very involved and they're done very well. I dug that. The story though starts to fall apart towards the end. Like the last half hour was a little like, huh? At times, I'm like, I really followed everything. I thought it was a good story, building really well, good actors. There's the girl from Ginger Snaps, the blonde sister. This is one of her early, this is like right after Ginger Snap, so that was kind of cool to see her. I didn't write anybody's names down, I'm sorry. The guy who's the main brother, who's, the mastermind of putting all this together, and he's really trying to build up this family as having its own place in their kind of where they grew up. He was extremely familiar. I looked up. He was in the film Renaissance Man and a tons of movies in like the 90s and early 2000s. So really solid casting. Some cheeseball things that happened in late 90s, early 2000s movies, as far as the rap music that's used in the party sequences is of the worst quality, in my opinion. Very demeaning lyrically. Not much you can do about that. It's the time period. What should say is the negative reaction of this film is that it gives credence not only to criminals, but it also reinforces the idea that the ghetto is a bad place. That inner city black life is in this horrendous setting. But it does show these glimpses of the past where when Snoop Dogg's character looks around, he sees what it was like in the 70s, and he reminisces of how the community would come together and how much there was like this loving environment. And now it is viewed as this horrible place that the one man who got out does not want his family to have anything to do with. And even though he's talking about his specific involvement with making it a bad place, it also transcends that into an idea that inner city black life is kind of doomed to this state and we don't want to fix it, is very much what his character is saying. So I see the pros and cons with this film, but generally speaking, aside from, like I said, and I think many movies from the late 90s, early 2000s have this issue of falling apart in the last 20 minutes, maybe because too much effects going on and not clear storyline being followed through, or a clear mythos perhaps for our villain, demon character. Overall, I enjoyed it. Good movie. Bones, not bad. So I might try and sneak in one more movie. By the way, I was able to watch this last night on Tubi, so if you want to check it out, it is on there for free. There's commercials, but it's free. So see you guys later.